Ex-husband taunted the ex-wife at the reunion courtyard until a returning envoy restored her forgotten title. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main characters. Emily Davis and Daniel Thompson were once a happily married couple, but life had different plans for them. The cracks in their relationship had started to appear long before the inevitable separation. Emily, a woman with grace and strength, had always stood by Daniel, even when he grew distant, absorbed in his own world. Their once promising future together was slowly replaced by resentment, and in the end, they chose to part ways. Despite the distance that had come between them, Emily never quite left Daniel's world. She kept her distance, but the memories, the scars, the emotions, they lingered. One evening, fate decided to bring them back together. It was an event, a reunion of sorts, held in a beautiful courtyard. The air was crisp, and the sun had just set, casting an orange glow across the scene. The moment Emily walked into the courtyard, her heart dropped. There he was, Daniel, standing with a smug expression on his face, as if nothing had ever changed between them. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, all the old wounds resurfaced. Daniel, without missing a beat, made sure to taunt her. He didn't hold back. His words, sharp and cutting, aimed at her very core. It was as if he had never truly cared for her, like their marriage had been nothing more than a joke to him. Emily stood there, frozen for a moment, but the hurt she felt began to simmer. The crowd around them was growing, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the way Daniel's words made her feel small, insignificant. She had spent so much time trying to move on, to rebuild her life, and yet here he was, knocking her down with just a few words. But then, just as the situation seemed unbearable, someone stepped in. Alexander Knight. A man she hadn't seen in years, walked into the courtyard. He had known Emily long before her marriage to Daniel, and he could see the pain in her eyes. He wasn't going to let Daniel continue his cruel remarks without a fight. The moment he stepped forward, the dynamic shifted. Alexander's presence was commanding, and the way he looked at Daniel, it was clear he wasn't intimidated by him. He wasn't there to start a fight, but he wasn't going to let Emily face this humiliation alone. The tension in the air was thick, and for the first time, Emily felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. The man she had once known and trusted was back, and he was going to help her find her way. As Alexander approached Emily, he spoke in a calm, authoritative voice that seemed to carry the weight of years of experience. He told Daniel to step aside, that it was time for Emily to reclaim what was rightfully hers. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she wasn't just a victim of her past. She was about to reclaim her life, her power, her dignity. Daniel had underestimated her. The real battle had just begun. As the seconds ticked by, Emily stood still, unsure of what to do next. Daniel's presence, the man she once loved and trusted, felt like an overwhelming weight on her shoulders. His words still echoed in her ears, each one cutting deeper than the last. But as Alexander Knight stepped forward, the air seemed to change. It wasn't just a matter of physical space. It was as though the entire room shifted, and suddenly, Emily felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in years. Alexander was here, and for the first time since the separation, Emily wasn't standing alone. She could feel his unwavering support without him needing to say a word. It was a kind of strength that radiated from him, one that made her feel like she could breathe again. Alexander didn't waste any time. His voice was calm, but it carried an authority that commanded attention. He turned to Daniel, his gaze unwavering. "This is enough," Alexander said firmly. Daniel's smug expression faltered, and for the first time that evening, a flicker of uncertainty appeared in his eyes. He had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots. But now, he was being challenged in a way that made him uncomfortable. The room grew quieter as everyone watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Emily felt her heart beat faster. She had no idea what Alexander had planned, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what Daniel might do or say. She trusted Alexander, and that trust gave her the courage she needed to stand tall. "You've said enough," Alexander continued, his voice steady. "It's time for Emily to take back what's hers." There was a moment of silence, thick with tension. Daniel seemed to struggle with the idea of letting go of his dominance. But the reality was clear. Emily was no longer the woman who would cower in the face of his cruelty. Alexander wasn't just protecting her, he was helping her reclaim something that had been taken from her. The crowd around them remained still, observing the unfolding drama. Emily, once a woman who had silently suffered, now stood with her back straight, her eyes no longer filled with doubt. She knew what Alexander meant. He wasn't just talking about the past, about the pain Daniel had caused her. He was talking about her future, the life she would rebuild for herself, one where she no longer allowed anyone, not even Daniel, to dictate her worth. "You can't keep treating her like this," Alexander said, his words directed at Daniel but meant for everyone to hear. "She's stronger than you think, and she's done with being your punching bag." The weight of those words hung in the air, and Emily's heart swelled with a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a woman who had reclaimed her strength, her voice, and her dignity. Alexander's words resonated within her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt proud of the person she was becoming. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but he was met with silence. There was nothing left to say. He could no longer break her down with his taunts, and the realization hit him hard. Emily had found her voice, and it was stronger than ever. As the moments stretched on, the tension in the courtyard began to shift. Emily stood tall, the weight of Alexander's words still resonating within her. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and for the first time in years, she could see her life with clarity. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed lost for words, his usual confidence faltering under the weight of the confrontation. The room was thick with silence, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. For a long time, Emily had been the one to shrink away, to take the blows both emotional and verbal. She had been the silent victim in a marriage that had drained her spirit. But now, with Alexander standing beside her, she realized that she didn't have to play that role anymore. She didn't have to be the one who silently endured. Alexander's presence wasn't just about protection, it was about empowering her to stand up for herself. It was a reminder that she had always been strong, even when she didn't believe it. She had allowed herself to become small in Daniel's world, but now, it was time for her to step into the light, to take back the space she had once allowed him to dominate. As the seconds passed, Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between Emily and Alexander. The power dynamic had completely changed. No longer was he the one calling the shots, making Emily feel small with his insults and ridicule. Now, he was the one who had to reckon with the truth of their past, and the truth of who Emily had become. Emily wasn't the same woman who had been trapped in a toxic relationship. She had grown, evolved, and it was clear to everyone in the courtyard that she was no longer willing to play the role of the victim. She was a woman who had fought for herself, who had fought to reclaim her identity, and now, she was ready to take on whatever came next. "You're right," Emily finally said, her voice steady and clear. She had never realized how much power her own voice held until this very moment. "It's time for me to take back what I deserve." Daniel's face tightened, but he said nothing. There was no defense, no comeback. He knew deep down that Emily had won. The crowd around them watched in silence, unsure of what would happen next, but Emily felt a wave of empowerment wash over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her dignity in that moment, she was reclaiming her future. The future that had been stolen from her by a man who never truly appreciated her. The future that had always been hers, but she had forgotten it, buried under the weight of the past. As Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, Emily turned her gaze back to Daniel. "I don't need your approval anymore," she said, her voice a little stronger now. I am enough. The words hung in the air, as Daniel's expression flickered from disbelief to something else. Perhaps a realization, perhaps regret. But whatever it was, it didn't matter. Emily had found her voice, and she was done letting anyone silence it. The courtyard that had once felt like a prison to her now felt like a space of freedom. She had not only reclaimed her strength, but she had also reclaimed her life. And in that moment she knew that nothing would ever make her shrink back into the shadows again. As Emily stood in the courtyard, a sense of liberation filled her, stronger than she had ever felt before. The crowd around them had begun to disperse, but it no longer mattered to her. All the eyes that once saw her as vulnerable now looked at her with a different kind of respect. She had walked into that courtyard a woman haunted by her past, a woman who had allowed herself to be defined by her mistakes, her fears, and her failed marriage. But now, she was leaving as someone completely different, someone who had taken control of her life and her future. Daniel stood across from her, silent, his face a mixture of confusion and regret. He had always been the one in control, the one who set the tone for their relationship, but now the tables had turned. Emily was no longer the woman he could belittle or ignore. She was no longer the woman who would shrink under his sharp words and cutting remarks. She had learned, over the years, that she was more than the sum of her mistakes. She was more than the hurt she had endured. And now, she was more than the woman Daniel had left behind. Emily could feel Alexander's presence beside her, a calm and steady force, reminding her that she was not alone. She had come so far, but it had been with the help of others, people who cared for her and believed in her strength. When she didn't. Alexander had been a friend in the past, but today, he was more than that. He was the person who had helped her find her voice again, the person who had given her the courage to face the past and take charge of her future. As the last of the guests began to leave, Alexander turned to Emily. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, his voice filled with encouragement. Emily nodded, her heart steady, her resolve firm. She knew what she had to do next. She had to let go of the past completely, to no longer allow it to hold any power over her. The weight she had carried for so long was finally lifting, and it was time to move forward. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs. It was as if she was breathing in a new beginning, one that was all hers. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, her eyes clear. Alexander smiled, giving her an approving nod. "Good," he replied. "Then let's move on to the next chapter of your life." The two of them walked away from the courtyard together, side by side. Emily's step was lighter now, her heart no longer burdened by the past. She had faced her fears, stood up for herself, and found the strength she had thought was lost forever. She was no longer bound by the chains of her former life, no longer tied to the person she had been. She was free, and that was a feeling unlike any other. The journey ahead of her was unknown, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to embrace whatever came next. As they walked into the future, Emily realized that the best was yet to come. The days that followed felt like a new beginning for Emily. As she moved through her daily life, there was a lightness in her step, a sense of freedom she had not known in years. The weight of her past, the years of self-doubt, and the shadow of her marriage to Daniel, no longer held power over her. She woke up each morning feeling stronger, more confident in the woman she was becoming. Alexander remained by her side, not as a crutch, but as a reminder of the strength she had always carried within herself. Their conversations were easy, filled with laughter and plans for the future. Emily had always known that Alexander was a good friend, but now she realized he was something more, a constant presence that encouraged her to step outside her comfort zone, to embrace the woman she had become. It wasn't just about reclaiming her past, it was about looking forward and creating a life that was truly hers. She began taking steps to rebuild the parts of her life that had been lost, starting with her career. Emily had always been passionate about art, but for years she had pushed that passion aside, convinced it wasn't practical or that she wasn't good enough. But now, with the support of those around her, including Alexander, she decided to pursue her dreams. She enrolled in an art class, something she had always wanted to do but never had the courage to attempt. With each brushstroke, she felt herself getting closer to the woman she was meant to be. Her confidence grew as she realized that the only thing standing in her way had been her own self-doubt. As the weeks went by, Emily's life began to take shape in ways she had never imagined. She found herself reconnecting with old friends, the ones she had distanced herself from during her marriage. They were amazed by the transformation in her, how her smile had returned, how her spirit seemed to glow. Emily's past no longer defined her. She was no longer the quiet, unsure woman who had lived in the shadow of someone else's control. She was becoming a woman who knew her worth, who knew that she had the right to take up space in this world and chase after her dreams. And then, one afternoon, as Emily was walking through the park, she ran into someone unexpected. It was Daniel. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. They both paused, looking at each other. Daniel had changed, just as she had, but there was something different in his eyes. Gone was the smugness that had once defined him. In its place was something more vulnerable, perhaps regret. But Emily didn't flinch. She didn't feel the old pang of fear or sadness. Instead, she stood tall and met his gaze, a quiet strength in her posture. "Emily," Daniel said softly, his voice unsure. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About how things ended." Emily took a breath, her heart steady. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was simply at peace. "It's in the past, Daniel," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've moved on." And just like that, the final thread of her old life unraveled. She had forgiven him, not for him, but for herself. She had let go of the weight he had once placed on her. With a final nod, she turned and walked away, her heart lighter than it had ever been. The future was wide open, and for the first time, Emily was ready to embrace it fully. Months passed, and with each one, Emily felt herself growing stronger, more confident in who she had become. The transformation was no longer just about reclaiming her past. It was about forging a new path forward. She had started to realize her dreams in ways she hadn't thought possible before. With her art, she had found a creative outlet that gave her the sense of fulfillment she had long been missing. The brushstrokes on the canvas were not just colors. They were expressions of her freedom, her independence, and her renewed sense of self-worth. As Emily stood in her small but bright studio one afternoon, she felt a sense of pride she hadn't known in years. Her artwork, once hidden behind the closed doors of self-doubt, was now displayed for others to see. The local gallery had agreed to showcase her work in their upcoming exhibit, and the excitement she felt was palpable. She had made it. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about knowing that she had the courage to share her true self with the world. She remembered the woman she had once been, the one who had been afraid to show her creativity, afraid to step into the spotlight. That woman felt like a distant memory now. The person who stood in front of the canvas today was someone who had fought for her happiness, who had learned to embrace the life she deserved. As she painted, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had taken back control of her life, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent steps. It hadn't been easy. There had been days when the weight of her past felt heavy, days when the memories of her marriage to Daniel threatened to pull her back into the shadows. But with each passing day, she had learned to rise above it. She had learned to forgive, not for him, but for herself. She had learned that her happiness was in her hands, and no one else's. Later that evening, as Emily prepared for her art exhibit, she found herself feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had built something beautiful from the pieces of her broken past, and it was finally time to share that with the world. The opening of her exhibit was filled with friends, new and old, who had supported her throughout her journey. They marveled at her work, and for the first time, Emily felt like she was truly seen. She wasn't just the woman who had been married to Daniel. She was Emily Davis, an artist, a woman who had found her strength, her passion, and her purpose. And as the night went on, surrounded by laughter, admiration, and new possibilities, Emily knew one thing for certain. Her future was no longer defined by anyone else. It was her own to create, and she was ready to do just that. The path ahead was uncertain, but she no longer feared it. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Emily's art exhibit came to a close, she felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever known. The evening had been filled with laughter, meaningful conversations, and the genuine admiration of those who truly understood her journey. Friends she had reconnected with, as well as new faces who admired her work, surrounded her. It was a night that celebrated not just her art, but the strength she had discovered within herself. The gallery buzzed with conversation, the walls lined with her pieces, a vivid reflection of the transformation she had undergone. Each painting told its own story, each stroke of color a piece of her soul laid bare. She had poured her heart into every canvas, and now, those who stood before them could see the depth of her emotions, her growth, and her resilience. Emily realized that this moment wasn't just about the recognition, it was about her ability to share her true self with the world. As the night progressed, she found herself talking to a group of people who were genuinely interested in her art, asking her questions about her process, her inspirations, and how she had come to create such powerful pieces. Their words weren't just compliments. They were acknowledgments of her strength and the emotional journey that had shaped her work. It was the kind of validation she had once sought from others, but now, she realized, the most important validation came from within. She no longer needed anyone to tell her she was worthy, she knew it for herself. The success of her exhibit wasn't the end of her journey, it was merely another step forward. As the final guests began to leave, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had taken the first steps in creating the life she had always dreamed of. She had faced her past, embraced her present, and was now looking ahead to a future full of possibilities. She had let go of the fear that had once held her back. The woman she had been was no longer defined by the shadows of her past. She had reclaimed her power, and with it, her life. The road ahead was still unknown, but Emily no longer feared the uncertainty. She knew that she was capable of navigating whatever came her way. As she packed up the last of her things from the gallery, she felt a sense of excitement stir within her. There was so much more she wanted to do, so much more she wanted to create. She wasn't just an artist, she was a woman who had learned to trust herself, to trust the journey, and to believe in the beauty of her own story. And with that, she walked out of the gallery, ready to continue her adventure. The world was waiting, and for the first time, Emily felt ready to embrace it fully. She had taken control of her narrative, and nothing, not even the past, could hold her back now. As weeks turned into months, Emily's life continued to evolve in ways she had never imagined. The gallery exhibit had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning of what she was capable of achieving. She started to receive invitations to showcase her work at other galleries and art festivals, each one an opportunity to share her voice, her art, with a wider audience. It felt surreal at first. The woman who had once doubted her talent, who had believed she wasn't good enough, was now being celebrated for her creativity. Each new opportunity reinforced the truth that she had always been worthy, always had a unique gift to share with the world. But even as her professional life blossomed, Emily knew that there was still much more to discover about herself. She was no longer just the artist in the studio. She was a woman reclaiming her life, building a future that was hers and hers alone. One quiet afternoon, as Emily walked through the park, she realized how far she had come. The park had been a place she often visited during her lowest points, the place where she had tried to find solace in the midst of her pain. It was where she had once walked, lost in her thoughts, questioning her worth and her future. But today, as she strolled along the same path, she felt something different. She felt peace. For the first time, the park wasn't a place of escape. It was a place where she could be present, where she could breathe in the beauty of the moment without fear or regret holding her back. It was in this quiet moment that she truly understood how much she had transformed. Her past no longer defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but it was no longer the lens through which she viewed herself. She had let go of the pain, the doubts, the anger, and in their place, she had created something new: hope, strength, and a deep sense of inner peace. As she walked, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting the tranquility of the moment. She pulled it out to find a message from Alexander, the friend who had stood by her through it all. "Hey, just checking in. How's the world treating you today?" Emily smiled, her heart warmed by the simple gesture. It wasn't just the art world that had embraced her, it was the people who had supported her, believed in her, and reminded her of her worth when she couldn't see it herself. She typed a quick reply. "It's good. Really good. I'm happy." She paused before sending it, thinking about the journey she had been on, the pain she had overcome, the obstacles she had faced, and the woman she had become. She had come so far, and yet she knew there was still so much to look forward to. There was still so much more to experience, to create, to learn. Emily wasn't just existing anymore. She was living, fully and authentically. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk, and she was ready. With a sense of excitement and contentment in her heart, Emily continued her walk, the world around her feeling brighter than it ever had before. She had discovered her true strength, and nothing could ever take that away from her. As the seasons changed, so did Emily's life. The growth she had experienced wasn't just about her career or the art she created, it was about the woman she had become. She had built something from the ground up, a life that was no longer held back by fear or regret. Each day, she woke up with purpose, with the knowledge that she was in control of her destiny. Her days were filled with creativity, with new opportunities to share her work with the world. She had taken the time to heal, to forgive herself for the mistakes of the past, and now, she was moving forward with a clarity that came from deep within. As she continued to grow, she found herself building new relationships, with people who saw her for who she truly was, not the woman defined by her past, but the woman who had fought for her future. One afternoon, while visiting a new art exhibit at a local gallery, Emily found herself standing in front of a piece that resonated with her on a deeper level. It was a painting of a woman breaking free from chains, her arms reaching toward the sky in a gesture of strength and liberation. It was a visual representation of everything Emily had worked to achieve in her own life. She stood there for a while, lost in the emotion of the moment. It was as if the painting had captured her entire journey, the pain, the growth, the freedom. As she walked through the exhibit, she realized just how far she had come. There was a time when she couldn't imagine a life like this, one filled with joy, self-empowerment, and the freedom to live authentically. But now, it was her reality. As Emily left the gallery, her phone buzzed once again, this time with a message from Alexander. It was a simple message, but it made her smile. "I'm proud of you. Keep going." She smiled. To herself, knowing that her journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. There was still so much more to discover, to create, to experience. And the best part was, she no longer had to do it alone. Emily had learned that true strength didn't come from avoiding the challenges in life, but from facing them head-on and using them to fuel her growth. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had learned to trust herself, to trust the process, and to trust that her story was still unfolding in the most beautiful of ways. As she stood there, looking out at the city before her, Emily knew that the world was full of endless possibilities. She had found her place in it, and she was ready to embrace it fully. No longer afraid of the unknown, she walked forward with a heart full of hope, excitement, and the belief that the best chapters of her life were yet to come.